Right, good evening. Thank you for coming along this evening. Thank you, ERPIC, for inviting me. There's obviously been an awful lot of speculation about what will happen if the gentleman over to my right strike gas. And there's been a lot of discussions, a lot of speculation, a lot of figures that are a little bit dodgy. And from the background that I come from, I cringe sometimes when I read things in the paper about how long it's going to take to build an LNG plant, how much gas there is, what we're going to do with it. So what we've tried to do here is I've tried to put as much as I can into black and white and to give you some comprehension and some perspective on the figures involved and how long it will take to build a plant of all capacities. I mean, I'd started to do my spreadsheets on Monday using a figure of 10 trillion cubic feet. Tuesday that changed because Noble said that they'd found somewhere between 3 and 9. So that was a morning of spreadsheet alterations the following morning. And then me getting my friends in the gas business to check my figures at Foster Wheeler, Worley Parsons, Bechtel, Brown and Root, and say, guys, just have a look over these. So I've now changed it to what is the latest information that I got as of about 4 o'clock this afternoon in Gary Lakes' office. So what we're going to look at is we look at the size of LNG plants, the economies of scale, the space requirements we need, the configuration options, construction and labour constraints, and onshore versus an offshore option. Okay, this is what was announced in the press on Tuesday. And then what if this gas is proved, what can Cyprus do with it? What are its options? One of the possibilities suggested has been to build an LNG or a liquefaction complex at Vasilicos. My general feeling on that is you could probably build a 1 MTPA train there, but you still wouldn't have a lot of space. But 2 square kilometres for a 15 MPTA plant, which has been mooted, I don't believe personally has got enough space to do that. My background is 35 years in the oil and gas business. I was chief engineer for Foster Wheeler, Worley Parsons on the Browse 15 million tonne per annum feasibility. I've worked on Qatar gas at various stages. I've worked on Northwest Shelf for Foster Wheeler and Worley Parsons. So I've got a little bit of experience in what it is that we're doing, and I was also chief engineer and critical vendor manager for 15 months on Pluto, which is also offshore Northwest Australia. So as far as I know, I've got pretty good background in this stuff. What is LNG? LNG is methane. We supercool it with refrigerants in various different processes. We'll explain what some of those are. But primarily, we take methane, pure methane, as pure as we can get it, down to minus 162 degrees C. At this temperature, it liquefies. There's quite a lot of stripping processes involved in cleaning up the gas to get it down to as pure as possible. But I was chatting with Solon this morning, Solon Cassinis, and he said, no, he said, from what has been discovered in Tamar, I think you guys might be able to confirm this, is that the gas is something in the region of about 99% pure methane, which makes it extremely sweet. I don't know if, is that correct? Yeah?
Very dry gas.
Okay, now 99%, that really does make the scrubbing and filtration processes relatively simple by comparison, because some gases are 75% methane with all of these, some of these nasties in them. Okay, once all the impurities have been filtered out, LNG itself is odourless, colourless, non-corrosive, it's non-toxic. It's in the supercooling process where it goes down to minus 162, when the methane becomes a liquid. There's some comparison gases. At the temperature it gets down to, it has a mass of about 45% of that of water, or an SG of somewhere between 430 and 470, depending on the impurities that are still in the gas. Is this making sense to everybody here who didn't do a chemistry degree? Okay. If you don't understand, just send me an email. LNG, because in liquid form, this gas, this liquid gas, being highly condensed, it has over 600 times the amount of energy in the same volume. There's probably not quite petrol, but around about the petrol mark. So if you put one of these glass containers of petrol in your car and you manage to do 10 kilometres, with the same amount of liquefied natural gas, the energy in it would take you 6,000 kilometres. So that is the reason what makes it so highly transportable. That's it in perspective. So this is what makes LNG the fuel of the moment, as it were, and the fuel of the future. Okay, now Tuesday's announcement of 3 to 9 trillion cubic feet, to put this in perspective, 9 trillion cubic feet is around about 255 cubic kilometres. And 3 trillion cubic feet is about 85 cubic kilometres. If anyone wants to work in metres, then 1 kilometre cube is 1 billion cubic metres. And there are 35.3 billion cubic feet to 1 billion cubic metres. All right, another perspective on it. If we go to the 3 trillion cubic feet of gas, this comes down to, if we were to just simply run Cyprus on the gas that's available as 3 trillion cubic feet, we could run this island for 102 years. That's another perspective on it. And again, there's been much speculation about the size of an LNG plant. Usually you don't build an LNG plant until you've got a customer. It's the old one, we're at the same stage that the oil refineries were at the turn of the 20th century. You don't send crude oil anywhere unless you've got a refinery to distill it. It's exactly the same thing. You can only sell LNG to somebody that's got a regasification facility or is intending to build one at the same time that you're discussing with them supplying them with LNG. The market is huge. Immaterial of what got said on Monday by certain people, the market is huge. I'm not into marketing, I'm just a nuts and bolts engineer, but the market is enormous, but it's, you can't take LNG unless you've got a regasification facility. These are prices of what it costs to build an LNG plant. I can't tell you the source that I got all these from, but I got them from quite a few of the big engineering houses that I've worked for. And they all confirmed these sort of range of figures to me to build LNG. A single 5 million tonne per annum train today will cost on land, onshore, somewhere between $1,600 and $2,000 American per tonne in today's money. The offshore figures go extremely high, but then there's a lot of other factors. But these figures, we would say in the industry, are plus minus 15%, and these are the figures that today it will cost you to build an LNG facility. If any of you want to contact me to get me to send you something else on this, please do, save you writing it all down. Okay, an LNG development concept. This is a brief look at, from a schematic point of view, what's involved in building an LNG development. You've got your wells, you've got your risers, you've got some form of structure over where that's relatively close to the well. You have a pipeline going onshore. The pipeline size is dependent on the pressure of the water that's above it. This was also mentioned on Monday. When you get very deep, you need to reduce the size of the pipe, otherwise the pipe will collapse on itself due to the pressure of the water. So there's a lot of factors. Pipelines as well, running at around about, these days at about 100 kilometres of subterranean or submersible pipeline. If it's in about 1,000 feet of water, we usually look at around about $750 million to $1 billion per 100 kilometres. That's a ballpark. The Noble guys will probably know better on what those figures cost, but they're around about the $750 million mark for 100 kilometres of pipe at about 1,000 feet. This is a breakdown of an entire development. These are roughly where we spend the money, again plus minus 15 to 25% on each of these figures. So this is what it would cost to actually build an LNG development. Okay, then you look at plant life. Now if you're going to build a 3 to 9 trillion cubic feet plant, If you plan your production on a 5 million tonne per annum train, your assumed reserves being 3 trillion cubic feet, you can run that plant for about 12 years. So you'd probably look, if you were going to liquefy it, you'd probably look at a smaller train size. But the problem then, the minute you move your train size down, your costs increase because of your throughputs and everything else. So everything is relative. But I can, as I say, I can give you all of these figures if you want to send me an email. If the plant life was 10, 20 or 30 TCF, then you start to get a major change in economies of scale. Your overall plant reduces enormously per tonne produced. But if you had an assumed reserve of, say, 20 trillion cubic feet, you'd run a 15 million tonne per annum LNG, probably in a 3x5 or a 2x7.5 configuration. You'd run that for 26.5 years. That's probably one of the most viable options because that's about the life that we anticipate most of the major equipment lasting for that period of time. When you come to actually design the plant, you look at trains, how often you're going to take those trains down, what the amount of maintenance and work that needs to be done on them. Obviously on a single train plant, you've got no income coming in at all during the period of time. A train is a process train. To take the gas in from one end, the gas comes in at one end, it then goes through a scrubbing process, or it will normally have gone through a scrubbing process separate from the process train. It then normally goes through, depending on the process you've decided to, or you've opted for, it goes through a compression, it goes through 3 stages of compression by 3 different gases, which is one of the most common process technologies. But it's a process train. You start with almost pure gas, pure methane at one end, and at the other end out comes liquid natural gas. So when we say that's what when we say 3 or 5 or 5 or 10 or 15 MPTPA, we would then normally split that because, as I say, as soon as you've got maintenance or anything else that needs to be done on the plant, you've got no income for that period of time. Okay, the Vasilikos site. The Vasilikos, as we all know, is located on the south coast. It's got a lot of things in its favour. Its line of sight to where the prospective wells are, which is a great help. You don't have to route them round an island or any other archipelagos. It's got relatively good access, but so has the entire island to close vicinity deep water, which is what you need to bring your LNG containers in, or your ships in. And there's already reasonable infrastructure around there. You've got access to the motorways and everything else. We don't have a rail network in Cyprus, but you're also on the route, I believe, of the gas transmission network that's going to be installed on the island. So it's in the perfect spot. My feelings are, though, that it isn't big enough. We've had a look at the potential size and scale of plants and how big a plant you would need for 3 and 9 trillion cubic feet. However, if further discoveries are made, like for instance they were in the 70s in the North Sea, the 40s field being one of the first, subsequently to that, I think the 3.7 billion barrels of oil that was originally estimated to be in the 40s, then quadrupled over the years as other wells were discovered. So it would be it would be far too early to actually say, yeah, we're definitely going to go with a 5 MTPA, or a million tonne per annum plant, or a 10 million tonne per annum plant until further discoveries are made. Or there is an alternative that the proven reserves, I believe they're proven, in Israel's waters, if they were sent here, we could actually build a liquefied natural gas plant that could actually take the gas in from Israel and charge them to liquefy it. But that's an option. So if, for instance, the 15 million tonne per annum capacity plant that's been suggested was built, this would probably take a 3 times 5 MTPA train, or a configuration, or a 2 by 7.5. LNG plant now, the biggest in the world is 10 million tonne per annum, or thereabouts. There's only one of these sites, that's in Qatar. Okay, now the Vasilicos site layout that was proposed, or the proposals that I've seen, I've overdrawn this with exactly the way that it was configured. Train 1, Train 2, Train 3 that are shown on here. Where's my? these. I think the train 3 was shown as a prospective future. This is very, very limited. Even the primary flare, which is the primary flare, I actually did some sums on the radius from a thermal point of view, and that pink dot over there that's about the size of the village of Murray is roughly the thermal envelope that you wouldn't want to go in with any equipment or people should the plant need to flare. If any of you don't know what a flare is, what happens is you have your feed gas comes into the plant. Does everyone understand a flow sheet? Yeah? Your feed gas comes into the plant at this point. Here it goes through gas treatment, or what we call an AGRU, acid gas removal unit, might be sulfur recovery, mercury retrieval, but it goes through a gas treatment process to remove some of those impurities that showed you earlier. Now, should there be a problem anywhere in this process between the refrigerant compression train, that's a process train, by the way, in its very, very basic form. But this compression station, if there is anything to go wrong in one of these or all of these at any one time, the plant must be capable of bypassing the entire throughput of the plant and have it sent to the flare. This is a huge amount of gas, absolutely huge amount of gas. A 15 million tonne per annum plant equates to 1,712 tonnes per hour, and that's of liquefied natural gas. That's 475 kilograms per second, which equates to 1,055 litres per second. Because it has an energy factor of 640 for gas, you've then got to multiply that, which equates to 675 cubic metres of gas going through the plant at any one time. You must be able to flare that. You must be able to get rid of that gas. The only way we know of doing it is to incinerate it. And we do that by putting it through a flare. Now, the flare size for a 15 MTPA plant is around about 23,800 cubic feet per second. This also leads to other problems, because should this have to go through the plant, this huge amount of gas needs to be stuck in a pipe of around about 72 inches. For one, the gas actually exceeds the speed of sound in it at that volume. So you've then got to split it up. The flare dictates that no equipment should be located within the thermal radius of the flare. And the safe thermal flare radius of a 15 million tonne per annum plant is in hundreds of metres. I can't give it to you exactly because it's totally dependent on how you design the flare. I've actually I've got the gas coming in here at around about 682 kilometres an hour in an 84-inch header. Then that goes into either a knockout pot or a manifold of some kind. That then is distributed via the manifold into 5 or possibly 6 or even 10 different risers. These risers, the velocity I just did some calcs and put them in as 42 inches by 5, which gives me a gas velocity of about 545 kilometres an hour. But this is the sort of envelope you need for a 15 million tonne per annum plant. In reality, this is almost a third of the entire Vasilicos site. And then another factor, apart from the fact that I believe we've got limited space at Vasilicos, another one that I love, the one in the paper where it tells me I can have an LNG plant in 4 or 5 years. I just love that one. That one gets, it's just not possible. I've said here even 10 years is extremely optimistic, and I've put together a very basic fast-tracked RFSU is ready for startup. I did a very fast-track plan on this to try and get it into a 10-year time frame. This is roughly how long it would take. I mean, there's some of the equipment that we use inside an LNG plant. For instance, the heat exchangers that we use are what we call spiral wound or coil wound heat exchanger. Some of these, if I wanted to buy one, I know this, I phoned Air Products this morning, and just to confirm, they told me if I wanted to buy one that was capable of handling a 5 MTPA plant, I can have it in 31 months. If I phoned Nuovo Pignoni and asked them when I could have a refrigerant compressor, or in the case of a 15 million tonne plant, I'd need, if it was a 3x5 configuration, I'd want 9 compressors. I wouldn't have the first one for 37 months. So, if you can build an LNG plant in 4 months, in 4 years, good luck. So I've said, the previous slide shows what would be an absolutely remarkable achievement. I've just never known an LNG plant be built so quickly. I worked on Browse as a lead chief engineer in 2006 when we were doing a feasibility. I think Air Products got the order back in June for the coil wound heat exchangers. That's 5 years after we did the feasibility. They don't believe they're going to come on stream till 2016, 2017, or 2016 at the very, very earliest. That's 10 years after I worked on it as a feasibility, and I joined it once the financial investment decision had been made. So all I'm trying to do is just to put some timeframes in perspective. It's not going to happen tomorrow afternoon. And there I mention again the long lead items, as we call them. We identify these very, very early on, but the problem is they're all dependent on the condition and state of the gas that's discovered. But as far as I've been told now, we're looking at a pretty good sweet gas. So that time could be reduced. Okay, technology. This moves all of the time. All of the time. The guys who make the power generation plant and the drivers to drive the compressors, we take a frame 9. Does anyone know what a frame? Do any of you have any idea what a frame 9 is? I know the guys from the Electricity Authority will, but a frame 9 is manufactured normally by General Electric. They produce around about 120 to 130 megawatts of power. We attach that power on a shaft directly to the compressor. And compression technology and compressor driver technology is not the same business as it was 15 years ago. Completely different business. We started off with frame 5s. We're talking about a 20 to 25 megawatt generator or compressor driver. We moved on to frame 7s up into the 40 to 50 megawatt range, and we now use frame 9s. These are big things. These are the size of a 5-story block of flats. We originally used to drive them off of steam, which was a result of what we normally do in the oil and gas industry. I won't go through all of these. Onshore, we would use a frame 7 or frame 9 drivers, possibly frame 6, depending on the configurations, but we're normally now, these days, frame 9 if you're looking at a 5 MTPA plant. If you were to go offshore, we'd use an aeroderivative. Basically, we take an engine off of a jet engine, and we run a turbine off of a jet engine. Our sparing capacity becomes greater. Our spares turn around. Operations and maintenance are a lot faster. I used to work for Rolls-Royce as International Installation and Commissioning Services Manager. And we've got most of our RB211s, which is the same engine that's on a 747 jet. We take an RB211 and we plonk them onto a platform in the North Sea to power it, because we can't run a cable from the beach from Aberdeen to 400 kilometres out into the fields. So if it's offshore, we invariably use aeroderivatives. These days we use Trents, and in fact they're using Trents on land in Qatar to actually just straightforward compress gas to 100 bar. Coolers. Now, the technology with these changes as well. Everything inside with a cooler on an LNG plant, all your refrigerant metals, but because of the refrigerant temperatures and cryogenics, most of the piping's aluminium, or an aluminium alloy. These coil wound heat exchangers are huge. They can take 24 months, 20 months just to wind. That's put in the refrigerant tubing. I won't bother you with the process technology at the moment, unless anybody wants me to go back to it. Okay, this is a coil wound heat exchanger. Now, that's what they look like inside, and I borrowed a photograph from my friends at Lindy. That's what they look like outside. These are the items that I said can take up to 31. When Air Products quoted me today, they said 31 months for one of these. And we need around about 9 on a 15 MTPA plant. Recent technology, because basically Lindy and Air Products are the only manufacturers of coil wound heat exchangers, a lot of companies now have started to go for a plate type heat exchanger. They're not as efficient, but they're a lot cheaper and a lot more people make them. But you're still going to wait 24 months for one of these. Okay, and these are the main manufacturers, the main licensors for large-scale liquefaction processes. ConocoPhillips is an optimized cascade system. C3MR is Air Products and Shell technology. Dual mixed refrigerant is an Air Product Shell. Parallel mixed refrigerant with 3 refrigerants is a Shell process. Linde have a mixed refrigerant process, and Air Products, the latest one, is the AP3. This system is the one that you can go to 10 million tonnes per annum with. You can as well with the parallel mixed refrigerant of Shells. And in fact, that shows, this is the size of the scales of plant now. That there is the latest 8 million tonne per annum that's been developed by APCI, with Air Products and Chemical Industries. That's the market share. The blue one is Air Products. Okay, Phillips Petroleum developed the closed-loop optimized LNG cascade cycle and improved this in the 90s. What is known as, is now just generally called the open loop. It's been further developed when they joined up with Conoco, which is now ConocoPhillips. Mixed refrigerant cycle, Pritchard Preco and Air Products, all MR's mixed refrigerant, and C3, which is a 3-stage mixed refrigerant process. I won't bother you with all this. That's the Phillips optimized cascade process. These here are the compressors. These are the heat exchangers. And that's why I say you need 9 compressors on a 5 million tonne per annum by 3 configuration. And it's the same with the heat exchangers. And you've seen the sizes of these. Again, that's the Phillips process, but that just gives a little bit more detail of it. 3 cycles, 3 gases, propane, ethylene and methane are the refrigerant gases. Sakhalin Island, I don't know if any of you heard of Sakhalin, but Sakhalin Island's on the east coast of Russia, up in the northwest Pacific. Mixed refrigerant process, Air Products propane, Air Products APX. You can see something most of the paperwork to do this presentation. But, okay, this is a comparison of technologies. This is something that would be decided upon after the decision to go forward with the plant. Question of power. I found it amusing listening to some of the speakers were in the Energy Summit here on Monday, talking about the need for EAC to supply the facility with 300 megawatts of power. It's nearly there, but you need about 375 to 390 in the loading condition. The loading condition being when you're actually coming to load ships. You need about at least 375 to 390. And what I didn't understand was why you would go to the EAC to buy it, because if you've got somebody who owns the plant, they're going to put in their own gas, they're going to put in their own power generation facility. One, they're then in complete charge of it, and with the sparing capacity that you'd normally build into an LNG plant, on an onshore plant, we normally call it N+1. N being the number of power generators you need to run the plant satisfactorily, and then you have one as a spare, that if anything falls over, you can fix it. And the plant doesn't need to come down, because every day you don't produce, you're losing money. They're also awfully difficult to turn a plant off and then turn one of these things back on again. So we try not to turn them off unless we have to during a planned maintenance schedule. So you need about 375 minimum megawatts of power. I should have drawn an overview of a process train, because if you look at a process train from the air, an LNG process train is just a mass of radiators. We use 10-meter diameter rotors to actually pull, or either direct or indirectly cool tubes. It's just one massive heat exchanger. And normally about 330, 340, for a 7.5 million tonne per annum train, your bank of fin fans, which is what we call them, your fin fans alone, there are 8 wide by 330 metres long, and these are 10 metre diameter. You've got to power all those motors. That's why you need a huge amount of power. I'm saying 375 megawatt for a 15 MTPA train, or two trains, take into account that this island runs at the moment on about 650 with some borrowed from the north. So it's a huge amount of power. But you wouldn't normally buy it from the local electricity generator. You actually supply them with any surplus that they needed. And in fact, with an N+1 configuration, the situation we had on the 11th of July here, the plant would have been able to supply 123 megawatts on a frame 9, just like that.
If it was in operation.
But it would, if it was in operation, yeah, hypothetically speaking. Okay. I've also mentioned here that with its own power, the sparing capacity, again, if the plant was based offshore, the sparing capacity would probably be N+2, but these would be smaller units. We then look at storage. These things are some of the biggest construction in the world. The biggest company that make them is a company called Chicago Bridge and Iron, and I don't know if they've got any competition on these. So you're a bit at the mercy of Chicago Bridge and Iron when you come to build an LNG tank. They've mastered the art of building these things. These are double-walled, double-skinned. They've usually got heaters in the base, because if you don't put them in, you're going to freeze your substrate and create a permafrost. They normally build them by building the roof inside and then floating it up on compressed air. These guys are a work of art. My friend, the guy that I would normally deal with at CBI, is currently lost in China. So I couldn't get the slideshow that I'd asked for to actually show you how we build these things. But to give you some idea of scale, that's an LNG tank. This is in the States at Savannah. At the time this was built, I think it was about 3 years ago. This was the biggest in the world. But take into account these are cars, it's quite a big tank. These are in Doha, these are in Yemen. That's inside one of the tanks. But these are huge. These are, they dwarf everything around them. From a safety perspective, there's been a couple of accidents. The problem is it's not necessarily from an explosive point of view unless the gas is given the opportunity to vaporise and stay all in one place. What we normally have a problem with LNG is it goes through an RPT, what do we call a rapid phase transition. If, for instance, this thing was made of carbon steel and it had water on it, if I spilt LNG on it, it would crack. It would just immediately crack and fall to pieces. And it has that effect on steel on ships, on plate. So because it is so cold, it immediately freezes everything it touches, when it touches water or anything that's going to change its temperature drastically. So there have been accidents. Gary and Chris said to me last Wednesday, they said, oh, but what about Skikda in Algeria? And I said, yeah, but that wasn't LNG. It wasn't actually LNG. It was an LNG plant, but it was because somebody had failed to look after one of the boilers, which ran dry. They added water to it, and it killed quite a lot of guys. So this was the problem they had in 2004, but it wasn't an LNG problem. An LNG pipeline burst in Belgium's Zeebrugge port. 23 guys died there. And then another one exploded in Nigeria in 2005. But it's got a relatively good safety record, but you still must design and maintain your equipment and everything else. It's the same with any plant. Okay, other opportunities if there is gas offshore. Various byproducts are produced during the process, but you should get liquefied petroleum gas as LPG, the liquid condensate, and the sulphur are all viable commodities and saleable commodities. There's another opportunity as well to take the condensate that comes with the gas, or to turn the gas into liquid. This process was originally developed by two Germans in 1923, Fischer and Tropsch, and they developed the Fischer-Tropsch process, which is primarily what Sasol use as their main technology. There's actually a plant in South Africa, Mossel Bay, that I was assisted in laying the plant out in the mid-80s, that is entirely, it's the equivalent of a 45,000 barrel a day refinery. But it's not an oil refinery, it's a synthetic fuel plant, but its energy equivalent is the same as 45,000 barrels a day. With that, they produce aviation fuel, diesel, naphtha, and petrol. The same could be done in Cyprus if you'd built a GTL, or a gas to liquids plant. The island could actually be self-sufficient in fuels if somebody decided to take the action and build a GTL. There's a lot of benefits as well to GTL. You can actually sell it to other refineries, and of which there's there's many in striking distance of here who could take some of your gas to liquids and they put it through a refinery because it improves the cetane rating of most fuels, especially diesel. Shipping. These things are huge. These things cost about, these days, you don't get any change at $500 million. The technology, again, with these has improved enormously over the years. I think in Cyprus, we only ever see LPG carriers out in Akrotiri Bay. LPG carriers are tiny by comparison to an LNG carrier. The biggest QMAX now, 266,000 metre cubed of LNG is a huge amount of LNG. To give you some idea, that's Q-Flex. This is QMAX. This is inside one of the tanks, of which there are usually 4. But that's just inside one of the tanks. It's all stainless steel mirrored, and the reason being is it acts like a thermos flask. But this is all heated. All of this wall all around here is heated. The gas actually boils off at -161 and starts to evaporate. And what these ships do is take that gas as the boil-off gas and they run their engines on it. And it becomes, and in fact some of these ships now actually can re-liquefy, which is what the Flex does. The Flex LNG producer regasifies or re-liquefies the gas, as well as using it as a feedstock. So these are options that you don't need to necessarily, you wouldn't then need to, if it is only a 3 trillion, if it is a 3 trillion cubic feet capacity reservoir, this is a very good way to handle your gas from it. This is Sakhalin Island. That's what it looks like, blot on the landscape. So there are other benefits from building offshore, which is something that I would moot. I said to Solon Cassinis this morning that he said, how far offshore do you recommend? I said about 5 kilometres. So one, it's easily then maintainable. You can ferry guys out to it. It's far enough offshore to actually be to have added interest, and you've got immediate deep water. But you need a big chunk of rock to build it on, or a big chunk of concrete. And we actually looked at that on Browse. We were considering building 2 7.5 million tonne per annum process trains and building them on top of 2 hollow concrete caissons, blocks. Now these concrete blocks, 300 metres long, 121 metres wide and 23 metres deep. We were then going to put 110,000 tonnes of topsides process train on each of these bricks, tow them across 1,800 miles of open water and sink them on the top of the Scott Reef. So it can be done. The environmentalists weren't too happy, neither were a lot of us who were working on the project, but that was one of the things that was mooted, and we spent £29 million of Woodside's money doing the feasibility for them. Okay, so there's options with offshore. One, it then leaves you with your real estate on land to handle either your GTL plant, your sulphur plant, your white products, technically, the condensates. So with offshore, you can go either the FPSO route. FPSO is floating production, storage and offloading vessel. And in fact, the guys who do a lot with these, I've done quite a few topsides designed for them, is Petrobras in Brazil. I think they're up to about P53 now, or P54. I don't know if you guys know. I know I worked on P52 to put the gas turbines on the floating production storage offloading vessel. What they do is they pull up to a mooring buoy. They take off the amount of gas or oil that they need to at the time. They then process that offshore, repump all of the nasty stuff back down the well, cap it again, and then sail onshore with the cargo. Various different people have looked at, or various different groups have looked at different ways of handling this. Okay, floating LNG plants. What we refer to as large is usually anything over 4 now to 10 million tonnes per annum. This is obviously a shore-based size. Lower end of range, 4 to 5 MTPA, may be suitable for large FPSOs, which means that you need about a 350, 360 metre long ship, about the size of the QMAX. What you'd basically do is you'd build your processed topsides on top of your on top of your LNG storage tanks. But you'd need a ship about 1,200 feet long. Okay, LNG for floating applications, the various different processes that are available. This is what Worley Parsons believe is the suitability to take them offshore. This is where there's an awful lot of gas in northwest Australia. There's a lot of it was discovered in the early 70s, but nothing could be done about it until turn of the century, really, because we didn't have the technology to fully exploit it because of the depths, and these are similar depths to what Noble are drilling in at the moment. But now these are exploitable. I've worked on this project, I've worked on this project, I've worked on that project. Most of these I've had some involvement with, Pluto downstream for definite. But all of these are in deep water. But this is a very busy area in northwest Australia. Okay, this is the current workload of Worley Parsons, who are handling a lot of those fields. These are the size of the plants they're looking at building at the moment, or they're actually working on at this present moment in time. Most of these are in Australia. And these are what we did on. There's another thing as well. If you were considering building a large LNG plant here, we have two ways of building things. We modularise or we stick build. Stick building is if we go and put concrete in the ground, we then build the entire structure on site. We build all the piping on site. We do everything on site. For one, it takes up your site time by a factor of about 2. So you're going to be on site for about 4 or 5 years, and to stick build a 15 MTPA plant, you need 22 to 26,000 people on site. So if we were to build a 15 MTPA plant in Cyprus, one, you've got the accommodation problem. You've also got probably a little bit of a drink and driving problem with a huge workforce like that. And you've got to find somewhere for them to stay, you've got to arrange visas. On an island this size, it's a complete work of art. What we would normally suggest then is that we modularise the plant as much as we possibly can. On this project, Northwest Shelf, and on Pluto, because the site location is so far away from anywhere, we're talking like 1,200, 1,500 miles north of Perth. What we did, we modularised the plant. And in fact, on Pluto, this one, we had 210 modularised units that were in excess of 5,000 tonnes shipping weights. They went up to 65,000 tonnes. That's what we shipped. And we actually built a harbour and dragged all of the modularised units that we built in Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines. We built them all in graving yards all around the world. And the shipping alone on this was something like 600 movements. So we were then buying the equipment. We'd buy the compressors off Nuova Pignoni in Florence. We'd then send those to Malaysia. We'd buy the refrigerant compressors from Air Products in the States, ship those to Thailand. I was chief engineer and critical vendor manager on this job for about 15 months. And all I used to do was go around to all the various different suppliers around the world and try to get advanced copies of drawings so I could give it to the design teams. But Pluto's not even completed yet, but we started looking at Pluto back in 2004. And Pluto should come on stream, off the record, 2015. That was ironic. Okay. Northwest Shelf was another one that was a highly modularised plant. And again, the location in northwest Australia. The other thing as well, we have a big problem in Australia with unions. We don't have a problem with them, it's just that it's really, really expensive to employ somebody in northwest Australia, or in anywhere in Australia, who's going to do any welding or anything for you. So we tend to get them built in areas where labour is slightly cheaper. And I won't say that the safety isn't, because we do work in an industry where we're extremely proud of our safety record. But we do tend to build things where we can find labour a lot cheaper than we can in northwest Australia. And the location alone, just to have the workforce, we would never have found it would have cost us a fortune to make accommodation for 22,000 people on site. Both of these, Northwest Shelf and Pluto. This is Browse. This is the one that was on these 300 metre long by 300 metres long, 121 metres wide, 23 metre deep. And that was just the process trains. You've then got 2 storage trains, loading dolphins, and the flare. And that from one end of the plant to the other was over 3 kilometres. And we've set those at the minimum distance that we can keep them apart. So this is why I'm saying 15 MTPA for Vasilicos, I don't believe would actually work. Okay, so this was one option for a floating, well, for an offshore facility. Browse is now going ahead, but it's going ahead in a different way. Shell and Woodside are still going to be building a plant offshore, but I don't know the full configuration of it now, and I couldn't find out enough for today's talk. But I do know that I did find some stuff in the press to say that an order is in place with their products for the coil wound heat exchangers. This is, I never worked on this project. Now, this looks as though it's a feasibility. It was sent to me by Worley Parsons. It's obviously an offshore facility that's built on, again, on a concrete caisson, but this is another type of option. GBS, up here, means gravity-based structure. These are normally hollow blocks, hollow concrete, normally about a 10 metre by 10 metre cube. Ovarat were designing them for us when we worked on Browse. Okay, and this is the one that I've just mentioned. The Air Products announced on the 30th of June selected to supply its proprietary cryogenic coil wound LNG heat exchangers. These are the little fellas that take 31 months to build. And then I've pulled stuff off that I found this week that says Tamar are actually considering an FLNG, floating liquefied natural gas. I don't know if there's, I've heard, all I did was I pulled this off the net. I've tried to keep abreast of things, as I say, just to make sure that what I talk about today is relative to what's been in the press this week. Okay, now I've had my little say. Have you got any questions?